So with that, go ahead and roll call, please.
Thank you. Commissioner Lenahan. Here. Commissioner Sheldon.
Present.
Commissioner Smith. Here. I do know that Commissioner Page, Commissioner Martinez, Commissioner Papen are excused. Commissioner Kendall, I have not heard from. Chris Barron.
Present.
Lisa Butler. Present. Sherry Simmons. Here. Cindy Hurst. Maybe joining us via Zoom. I'll keep an eye open. And I have not heard from Marlo or Valerie.
Okay, thank you. Well, we definitely have a quorum, so we're going to go ahead and go forward. With that, we have a consent agenda, which includes two items. One is the agenda for tonight's special committee meeting of the Budget Committee, and then approval of the May 3rd minutes, which was our last meeting. And they are attached. Unless there's any questions, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda for the meeting on May 23rd, 2023 of the North Plains Budget Committee. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Hearing none opposed, motion is carried. Thank you. Doesn't appear like we have any public in front of us. Do we have any public online? I think so. Okay, so we're going to go right past public comment and move into our public hearing. And that is for a review and adjustments in the 2023-2025 budget that we adopted at our last meeting due to the insufficient revenues that we'll have from failure of the public safety levy.
Just clarification, I think we made a recommendation, we didn't adopt it.
Well, yeah, that's what I meant, sorry. The recommendation to pass on to the council. So yes, we need to discuss the adjustment of that recommendation. Thank you, Madam Mayor. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill Reed and Andy Barner as he needs to chime in there.
Okay, thank you, Chair Sheldon. Thanks to those committed that showed up tonight for this third meeting. I think this is the first time we've had, maybe my first year we had 3 budget meetings. But it's been pretty smooth sailing, but obviously we hit a little for the past few years, and this presented another challenge here, but we'll get through it. So there's really just a few changes that staff is suggesting from the budget that was recommended for approval. Just a few weeks back, we're at this stage here, the post-election budget committee meeting. Results of the ballot measure, the proposed local option levy, aren't final yet, but it's pretty obvious that it did not pass. So we're here to have some adjustments because Chair Sheldon had referred to. There's some adjustments that need to be made to some of the revenue and service level. What was recommended previously. And really the as we kind of discussed a few weeks ago, these were the successful levy option scenarios. Here on the right side is what we need to consider for changes regarding public safety levels, and then where does revenue that was expected to come from a levy, where does that come from for various general fund services? And that will be a continuation of the water fund subsidy as before. So really there are changes to 2 funds, and this is where I'll turn it over to Bill to get into a couple of those specifics.
Thank you, Andy. As Andy mentioned, there are really only 2 places where we are proposing amendments to the budget that you already approved as a result of the levy not passing. The first is the public safety department, and those are the numbers up on the screen. But I just want to summarize the changes from what you did previously approve. First of all, we have taken out all local option levy revenue we were projecting as a result of a levy passing. So that revenue, which was around $1.6 million over the 2-year biennium, that's all gone. But of course, also what we what we heard as a result of the levy results was that we are going to bring our law enforcement contract expense with the Washington County Sheriff's Office back down to guaranteed patrol from the hours of local patrol from the hours of 7 a.m. and p.m. So retaining the current number of officers that we have in the city. So we're back to the same as previous contract, and we're going to scale back overtime as well to match with the message that the cost of overnight patrol folks that I want to pay for it. So that brings 2-year contract costs based on the most recent numbers we just received from Washington County Sheriff's Office down to just a little over 1.5 million over the 2-year period. So we're cutting back significantly on that. It'll be a 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. patrol. So those are kind of the 2 big changes directly resulting from the levy. Now, the other aspect of the levy was that it was set and put before voters with the plan for sufficient levy revenue to cap public safety department's share of unrestricted general fund revenues to 34%. And that was part of the target, a more sustainable share of revenues coming into the general fund actually going to law enforcement. Because of the levy not passing and that revenue not being received and helping cap general fund share for public safety, we now have to budget for 52% of our general fund's unrestricted revenues to help pay for public safety costs. So that amounts to a little under about $1.46 million from the general fund share of law enforcement expense. So by the end of the biennium, given the new share of general fund unrestricted revenues, and given the reduced cost, kind of scaling back to the current contract levels for service level, we're looking at the end of the biennium now, budgeted anyway, for an ending department balance of $11,500. So not much left over, but the expenses and revenues, the balance are pretty close. So back to current service levels and returning no levy revenue and back to the general fund unrestricted revenues, really covering the cost of public safety at 52% of total. Any questions about that?
Yes, I don't have my glasses on, so sorry if it's right in front of my face. Is projected overtime expenses in that as well?
Yes, it is. We have, for the 2-year period, about a $20,000 baked in budget for occasional overtime when things happen, but we don't have budget for planned regular extensive overtime in there.
Okay. Is that pretty typical of what we've been spending in the last biennium?
Prior to the decision to expand overtime specifically to when we can have overnight coverage, this number is back to a more normal number prior to that.
So just to confirm, it's $20,000 for 2 years, and it's as needed overtime.
Sorry, Mary, could you repeat that question?
$20,000 for 2 years as needed for overtime.
Yes.
That's what's in. Okay,
Yes.
just clarify.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, you're correct.
So this is, probably a council discussion question, but, the council is gonna have to talk about, what we might need to do. If we do have overtime, right? Beyond the as needed overtime. And, I would be curious to know, like, with a budget hat on, where would those funds come from? If the council were to say, listen, we need to have a little bit more cushion, like we need to have a little more funding, where would that money come from?
Local option motives.
Well, Mayor, you immediately, without a local option levy, you basically have two options.
Operator to pay all.
You have contingency, but you can always go for a supplemental budget if we have to have the coverage. I don't think we should have any interest in any way, shape, or form in providing any coverage. Because the voters spoke and they rejected it, and therefore it should be taken away. I think some incidental overtime is fine. That would be at the discretion of the chief, and if we have 20,000 in there, that should cover some events and some of those things that we might need to. Or we look at a contingency or into the contingency. Unless we want to go for a supplemental budget, at least that's, in my opinion, the way it should be. It's the way we should be looking at this.
Thank you, Councilor Sheldon. I think just to kind of technically accurate answer your question, Mayor, Councilor Sheldon is correct. The first one would be contingency. The second would be the general fund just does not increase its reserves over the course of the biennium and spends a little bit more than we budgeted the reserves to increase. So you would just basically be affecting what the end of biennium reserves impact is. But that's something you could talk about, and then we could amend before city council at adoption time. But those would kind of be, or as Councilor Sheldon said, this budget goes all the way through the process, and if the time comes and supplemental budget is needed, that can be done too.
No, thank you. I just wanted to be clear. On understanding that flow. Again, I think it's a conversation we'll probably have at council, but just with a budget hat on, I just wanted to make sure that everybody here understood where that would happen if it were to happen. Yeah, thanks.
And like Andy very correctly pointed out, the other option would just be to bump up the water fund transfer to the general fund, and so have the water fund pay for additional police spending.
That's a council discussion. I mean, I don't think the budget committee needs to go there. As far as I'm concerned, we constrict the funds. We have coverage, or we have an amount for some overtime when it's necessary. And I don't think that I think the chief understands his marching orders based upon where the dollars are at. So, unless the council is in the mood to maybe change something, I don't see why we want to do that. That's a down the road discussion, in my opinion.
I've got a question. In the past budgets, have we ever run into percent of overtime before for police options in the last 3 or 4 years?
Councilor Smith, as in, do you mean we've targeted how much overtime there needs to be?
Has there been that much overtime in the last 4 years on average? Past history.
I don't, do you know, Hannah?
The only time in my time that what we're essentially saying now, recommending now, is going back to a level, basically we were a year ago, or 15 months ago, before the council had authorized an additional $100,000 to cover those occasional 3 or 4 nights a week of mostly overnight coverage. We're kind of reverting back to those days. And this would be more in line. We were usually budgeting. I mean, at that time, we were budgeting $5,000 a year in overtime. So now we're closer to 10 or 12, because over the 2 years, we got between about 23 or 25,000. We got the numbers from Washington County, we just rounded it up to the nearest whatever, added about 4% onto that for overtime, and that's where this lands. So that gives us, we think, sufficient cushion at these service levels.
Okay, so it's curious. I think that should be more than 5.
Yeah, and if anything unforeseen happens, if during this 2-year biennium, council makes a policy decision and changes course, the supplemental is always on the table, and then, you know, we'll figure that out when we need to, but we have those options.
Any other questions about the new proposed amendments to the public safety budget?
What it does to the general fund, what it does to the public safety.
Right, so this exhibit just demonstrates the budget that you approved before with the levy revenue assumption. And this is in this amended proposed budget, what the distribution of, that's okay, this is what the distribution of unrestricted general fund revenues looks like. And it looks a lot more like it did this current biennium that we budgeted for. The only main differences are that finance and administration, what used to be general government, is now really kind of treated like an internal services fund department, so it doesn't get unrestricted revenues directly. Boards and commissions, kind of a part of what used to be the general government fund, is right here at a little over 14.5%. Public safety is now going to have to be 52% of, that's up from 48% from this current biennium. It's up from 48 to 52%. Libraries up a little bit from 28% to 30, but that's kind of the same as what was in the previous budget. And then the areas we kind of brought down more closely to the way the budget used to be. Our community development is at 2.5%, and Parks and Rec would be 1% of unrestricted general fund revenues. Now, what goes along with this is the next budget. We can take questions about this if needed, if anybody has any. But we'll be back to the water fund, transferring sufficient revenues over to make sure this is supplemented and everything is funded adequately the way it had been done prior, including this current biennium. But the distribution on the right is how we'll be distributing unrestricted general fund revenues like property taxes, franchise fees, that sort of thing, that are earmarked.
So with the water funds now going back to the general, what is that going to do for the UGB, and what happens if we need to do repairs for anything around the city?
Good questions. So let's go ahead and move. We can go ahead and move to the water budget. You're okay. So, actually, this is kind of just, sorry, I forgot about this exhibit. This is just kind of detail to show that between water fund transfer and the new kind of return to the way the general fund unrestricted revenue distribution was, each of the departments are fully funded. We have just a minor expected negative balance at the end of the biennium for the Parks and Rec department and community development department, but I mean, you know, things
Really stay with the budget.
yeah, the target is not to spend what you budget, and for most things, unless there's an extraordinary thing, most things come in under budget or have been. So that's kind of what the picture looks like, returning to the current kind of the new distribution of general fund revenues. So let's go to the water budget if you wouldn't mind. That's from the water rate study. We can go back to that as well. Okay, so the water fund, and it's a lot of numbers. So what we've done, a few different things. First, on the revenue side for the water fund, and getting at your question, Chris. The first thing is that the levy, by stabilizing the general fund and how by not getting a water fund, a transfer from the water fund, it would have enabled a rate reset in FY '24, cutting base water rates for residential customers by 10%, and then increasing by inflation every year thereafter, starting in FY '25. What we've done in the budget here now is because the levy didn't pass. We've gone back to the original plan we talked about, and that was a rate freeze in FY '24, so rates don't change come July 1 of this year. But July 1, 2024, the beginning of next fiscal year 25, rates will go up indexed to inflation. Base water rates will go up indexed to inflation. So that's the current, so this revenue figure here, consistent with the final result of our water rate study that had been amended slightly to reflect the levy decision. These are the new water revenues here, and then total revenues for the water fund here. So those things have been changed. So basically revenues are up as a result of the water rate reset not happening. Thank you.
Question?
Yeah, sure.
Is it still going up 5% in 25, or is it going more than that?
Well, it'll be indexed inflation by expectation, like inflation expectation for 2025 right now, to the extent that anybody can forecast out that far. It is 3.5, 4 max. And right now, I mean, let's talk in 3 months. I mean, but that's the throwing the dart at the dartboard right now, to be honest. There are better dart throwers than others, but that's probably the best number now. Okay, so after cutting back law enforcement costs, rebalancing general fund, unrestricted revenue distribution. For the biennium we're budgeting for, we're going to need to make a $488,000 transfer from the water fund over to the general fund. That's a 2-year figure. That's what's needed for the 2-year period, okay? That's actually a little bit lower than the transfer that we made or we budgeted for and will make come June 30th of this year. That transfer budgeted was just south of $530,000. And part of that is just the nature of some of the much more expensive homes that have been built. Some of them are contributing a little more per household than others, so that's a little bit of a bump temporarily. But that's really kind of the main reason why that transfer is expected to be lower in the next biennium than currently, but it's pretty close. So that's reflected in the budget. And then total expenditures reflects that transfer over to the general fund that wasn't previously there. And so the change in the fund balance and total reserves at the end of the biennium, here's the net effect. And unfortunately, Butch isn't here, Counselor isn't here, but he asked the question at the last meeting of what is the net effect on the water fund budget reserves. And so with this proposed budget, amended proposed budget, we expect to add over the biennium $525,000 increased reserves by that amount. The budget with the levy allowed us to budget for about $650,000 to be added to reserves. And again, by not having a 10% rate cut in FY '24, is contributing to all of this. But that's where the numbers land and what we're proposing. So to get back to your question, Chris, we have to figure out some way, and we'll talk a little bit about it later. In the next 1.5 to 2 years, sooner rather than later, we have to figure out a way to supplement or reimburse the water fund or figure out a new revenue source to pay or basically to eliminate the water subsidy or reduce it. So there's some kind of reimbursement of the expense that's happening. Okay. And there are mechanisms out there. that other cities do use. And our plan is after this budget is adopted, is to go out and explore and kind of bring back to council and suggest these are options for getting over the hump with this. But right now, we don't have that freed up capacity for immediate borrowing capacity. We just have to plan for a new revenue stream to help return that to us for when the time comes. But we've been looking and we've identified some options to dig into and bring to council to discuss.
So that right now, we just got the figures from the water rate consultant yesterday. At this current level, going back to a 0% change in water rates, keeping this transfer or subsidy to the general fund, whatever you call it, still there, we'd still borrow about $6.5 million. It was in 2025. For industrial site readiness, for North Plains to really rebalance the economy and take advantage of a lot of the opportunities that are out there, $6.5 million doesn't go far. If we need to help put the bill for some infrastructure, and we already know some cost estimates to bring some of that here for North Plains. So having more than that would be useful. Having more than that skin in the game would be useful because the ROI on that for industrial lands would be much, it would bear fruit. So to Bill's point, yeah, we'll need to find work together, find a solution. And I think I feel pretty good about that we can do that with the council to reduce or eliminate that subsidy. And then that's our best bonding option in the cities.
Probably a question to bring to council, so I'll come next time, but I'll just ask it here. With our water rates being what they're at, is that going to detract people from coming here? Manufacturers need a lot of water. Farmers need a lot of water. I mean, we have ag and manufacturing as being what we're trying to establish an economy on. Right. So reality of it, are they outside the norm of what our competitors are doing in this market?
The fullest answer to that question is we actually don't know, because there are a lot of things that we have to plan for and figure out. The main thing is with higher capacity water, we know that has to be brought here. We're not sure how that would be paid for, if the pipe would be significantly funded with semiconductor related funds or loans. What North Plains' share of that would even be, because it looks like other cities might benefit from that investment. So that's kind of a complicated project and a complicated answer. Our water rates right now, if we had industrial sites ready, and we had ready, and I mean fully served and everything, if somebody came in and looked at our water rates currently for an industrial user, we would not be competitive. But the plan and working with a water service provider would be to bring things in a manner that lets us be competitive. Hillsborough, for instance, has a great system whereby they figure out competitive, extremely high volume water rates for larger users buying guaranteed water demand, and then they solve for however cheaply they can charge households and other businesses based on having that guaranteed extremely high volume sales. Even though the per unit water rates those big manufacturers pay are extremely small, the volume they sell enables much cheaper household base rates and other business base rates, and that's just how they do business. So we're looking at working through the process with the UGB expansion to enable us to get at something that looks more like that. So it's too early to say, I guess, is the answer.
Strictly speaking, from a commercial or industrial standpoint, actually, our rates are right on par with Hillsborough. they're like almost exactly a part of that. It's the residential rates that residents obviously, unfortunately, have the floater because that's the bulk, that's the majority of all our water use. So once we get, as Bill was saying, once we get further into that balance of, less reliance on homes for the percentage of everything funded for government, we can build that into the water rate model as well. Because Hillsboro's rates, I'm looking at them right now, $48 a month, same as North Plains. We have the same rate class, basically more or less for commercial and residential. And so we could be able to tweak that and pivot a little bit more favorably towards residents once we get to a point where it's going to be sustainable to do so.
Any other questions about the water fund budget? That really pretty much sums up the changes. They're limited to that one department, public safety, and then the water fund. So everything else is really pretty much the same. And we just move forward on figuring out other ways to reduce water revenue support for the general fund. And those are our marching orders, part of them as a result of this process.
Okay, folks, do anybody have any questions, additional questions, lingering questions? And I think as far as maybe, I don't know that it was 100% directly answered, at least from Chris's point, but the budget does include 4 repairs that we're going to need, which is basically, we're as Bill mentioned, we're just going to be robbing more money from our capital fund, really is what it is. It's unfortunate, but we do need to explore some other factors to gain. We have to run our government. We can't run it on a nickel. People are going to have to understand that at some point. It's always cheaper to pay a little more in your property tax statement and deduct that on your return. You're not going to do that with your water bill. People went that direction many, many years ago here. They just didn't understand that. And it's unfortunate, but that's where we're at. And I would say, if we have a consensus, I'll entertain a motion to make a recommendation to council that we put forth the budget as it's amended in both the public safety and the water fund. Don't be bashful.
I will make a motion to make recommendations to put forth this amended budget to the city council for adoption.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. So with that, is there any discussion? And hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Hearing none opposed, the motion is carried. Thank you. And I believe this will conclude our budget committee hearing.
URA is still fine.
And yes, I know we're not going there. Again, thank you for your service, and we'll see you again in a couple more years unless we come back with a supplemental budget. Thank you.